Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with LearnVisualStudio.net. In this lesson, we're going to search for Flickr photos that are near the geo-coordinate position as determined by our phone. So many of the most popular phone apps have some interaction with web-based services. So the app allows users to get at their own data that they've stored in the cloud, marketing term, or they provide access to data in order to make it available in some fresh new way. As developers, we can access the web-based services programmatically if they expose a web API. And a web API is usually just an HTTP-based method call. So the URL includes the input parameters of the method call, and then the web API will return data back in some standard format. Nowadays, that's usually XML or JSON, the JavaScript object notation. And Flickr is a great example of a web service that we can leverage in our apps. They have a vast amount of image data that we can search for via their web-based API. All we need to do is call one of their methods and then parse through all of the data that they return to us. So our game plan in this lesson is, first of all, to do a little investigation into the Flickr API to see how we can leverage it in our app. Then we're going to get set up with Flickr so that we can make calls to their API and get some examples of how to call the method that we want to utilize and then look at the data that we would expect back from Flickr. And then we're going to write code in our app to actually do that, to make the calls to the Flickr API. And then when we get data back from our call to the Flickr API, we want to figure out how to parse that data and actually obtain a picture that we can then display in our app. That's a great first step. And so this is a very long lesson, this and the lesson after that, because it's crucial. It serves as a proof of concept that our idea will actually work. We're going to see how all the pieces come together, and then the rest of this series will merely be adding improvements and refinements to what we've done in this lesson. All right, so as you can see, I've already navigated to flickr.com/services/API. This is their API documentation for what they call the App Garden. Now, the first thing you're going to need to do is get a Yahoo login, and I already have one, so I'm just going to log in here. And now that I've logged in and I have a developer account set up, and I'm going to leave you to figure that out because this will change often, I'm sure, from the time I record this to the time that you watch this. The next thing that you're going to need is you're going to need an API key. And so most companies that do expose APIs over the web, they want to ensure that developers are complying with their terms of service, or they want to track the usage by app to determine how their apps are or their APIs are actually being leveraged. And I suppose even in extreme cases, the company might want to shut down an app that's abusing their service. So this is why most of them require a unique identification for the developer and the app through the use of an API key, and Flickr is no different here. So to get an API key for our app, you want to find the API key link somewhere on this page. It happens to be in my version of the page under this little gray area right here. And what we want to do is you'll see a list of all of the API keys that were granted for your apps. And so you're going to need to use a different API key for each app that you intend to use with Flickr's API. Now, ultimately, you're going to want to create your first one using this Get Another Key button. And it's going to ask you whether this is a commercial or non-commercial concern. We're going to apply for a non-commercial key for now, but in the future, if we were to use this for a commercial app or something along those lines, then we would obviously need to select the other option there. All right, so what is the name of our app? It's called Around Me. And what are you building? I'm just going to tell them I'm building a simple app to learn more about Windows Phone 8 development using the Flickr API and the phone's GPS to find photos near where the user is currently standing. Hope I got that spelled all right. I will go ahead and agree blindly to these terms and conditions and click the Submit button. And you'll see that you have your very own new shiny API key and a secret. And I'm probably not supposed to legally reveal these here. However, I'm probably going to delete these keys and the secret immediately after this series of lessons. So go ahead and try and use it if you want. It's not going to work for you. But let's go back to the API documentation page. And here you're going to see a list kind of throughout here on the right-hand side of all of the web callable APIs that are available on Flickr. And you can literally perform any conceivable operation using Flickr as the back-end storage and the processor for your photos, and you can create new applications that mash up Flickr's functionality with some of your own functionality like we're going to do. And so what we want to do is combine Flickr's search capability for their photos that were taken geographically in the same place as the user of our app. So what we want to do is we want to look for the flickr.photos.search API, and I see it right here as I scroll through. And I'm going to go ahead and click that to learn more about that particular method, that particular API. So how do we call it? What options can we send along to specify the geolocation that we want to search for, and so on? And you can see here it gives you a list of all possible arguments that are passable into the API, and then we can also see what we would expect back from the call, and finally error codes that might pop up and the reason for them. Furthermore, we see this API Explorer, which I found extremely helpful, and it gives us a way to just experiment and see, for example, let's take a look at search text that we want to search for. So observatory, we're going to look for the latitude and the longitude. You'll notice that all of these are optional. So we can just send in a bare minimum search and get something back potentially. We don't have to use all of these. We just will select the ones that we want to send along and what their values are. So I think in our case, I don't remember exactly, but it was 41.8988. I'll just make something up. And negative 87.6123, I think. I'm just making that up. The radius, and you can see if we hover over, we get some explanation about what these are. The radius and what the radius units are. By default, they're kilometers. However, we can also choose miles. So let's just say within a radius of 10 kilometers. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and select sign call with no user token. So we're not using somebody else's user token. We're just going to use our own API key in the call. And I'm going to go ahead and click the output to be JSON, because that's what I think I ultimately want to work with. We've already worked with Newtonsoft's JSON library. I think we can utilize that again in this lesson in order to work with the JSON that comes back from Flickr, parse through it, or actually I've got a plan that we can use to take all the JSON data we get back and just automatically dehydrate it into instances of classes. We're going to do that next. And then we'll be able to use it in our app. So I prefer JSON. Finally, I'm going to click the call method button here at the bottom. And what it will do, if we scroll down, is it'll give us a sample of the JSON that we would expect to get back. And then also it would give us an example of the API call that we could expect to make. And it substitutes in, for example, our API key and so on. And so what we'll do is we'll construct this URL in C# code, substituting in like the search text, the latitude, the longitude, and things, and the API key and things of that nature. All right. So let's go ahead and move on now. We've got a sense of what we're going to do here with Flickr. Now let's set up our project to actually make those calls. So back in my Visual Studio project, I need to prepare for making my first call into the Flickr API. I'll want to brand the app by changing simple things like the name of the app, the page titles, and things of that nature. And for this app, you know, we've already talked about localization and things like that before. I'm not going to go through any of that. I'm just going to hard code these values. So for example, here in the text block, we'll change this to around me, and the page name will be pictures near ... like that. All right, and then the next thing that I want to do is I want to go down to the content panel and set it up. And I'm going to create 3 rows. The first row will be for a little text block that I'm going to display our current GPS location. So first of all, let me create a series of grid.row definitions. And we'll create our first row definition with a height of 50. Because again, I just want a little text block there that I'm going to remove later. And I have another row definition that I'm going to set to a height of 200. And this will contain our map control as we have it right now. And then finally, I'm going to create a row definition for the image that we get back from our call to the Flickr API. Okay, and so now what we'll do is I'm going to start off by adding a text block, and we'll go ahead and give it a programmatic name because I plan on calling this from C#. So result text block, and I'll set it in grid.row equals 0. I think I changed my mind. I'm going to put the image in the second row. So we're going to create an image control, and I'm going to give it a name as well. We'll just call this Flickr image, and we'll get rid of this eventually, but I just want to make one quick call to see if I can get data. And after I can prove that I can, then we'll move to another page where we'll have the entire search results, not just one photo. And I'm going to use this stretch attribute to say I want it uniform to fill. Don't stretch the image, just fit as much you can in that area that you've got. And if you can't get it all in there, don't stress about it. And then we'll set our map then to grid.row, give it the rest too. So it'll have the largest area at the bottom. Okay? So again, my goal is to populate this image control with a single image. And later on, we're going to remove all this. I'll add a search results page that can display all the results. But for now, I just want to hack something together to figure out how to call into the Flickr API programmatically and get results, and then we can go there and I'll make it work correctly later on. Okay. So in order to make this happen, I'm going to go to my mainpage.xaml.cs, and I want to add, actually I'm going to change the update map method. So let me just comment out this set view here, and I'm going to add a little more code. And so we're going to set the aroundme.center, aroundmemap.center equal to the GPS chord center, and the aroundmemap.zoom level equals 15. And you might ask, well, how is that different than this? It's not. I just felt like making a different type of call there. Result text block dot text equals string dot format 0 and 1. So we want to just display the current latitude and longitude just to make sure we're getting those values, and I want to see it on screen. So aroundmemap.center.latitude and aroundmemap.center.longitude, and this will help me determine if I do run into any problems where the problem is at. If I don't get any latitude and longitude, I know that's the problem. And then finally, now that I have latitude and longitude, I am ready to make my first call into Flickr. Now, how am I going to make a call to a web service through HTTP, just like any other website? How am I going to make that call and then retrieve back results? Well, I'm going to need a special class that will allow me to do that. And I need something called an HTTP client. And I can find an HTTP client at suitable for the Windows Phone at nuget.org/packages/microsoft.net.http. And you can see the description here. This package provides a programming interface for modern HTTP applications on a bunch of platforms, not the least of which is Windows Phone 8. This package includes HTTP client for sending requests over HTTP, as well as HTTP request message and response message. So request and response messages for processing HTTP messages. Great. Okay, so how am I going to install it? I'm going to open up the Package Manager console and type in this command. Well, what in the world is the Package Manager console? It's NuGet. It's just a command line version of NuGet. Some people think it's faster than using the dialog that we've been using up to this point. So we're gonna see if that's true. I'm gonna copy this, and then I'm going to go to Visual Studio and go to the Tools menu, and then the Library Package Manager, and select the Package Manager console. This will pop open the Package Manager console, and I'm merely going to Control V to paste in the install-package Microsoft.net.http command and hit return on my keyboard. And I get a series of messages about what it is attempting to do to my project, to update this, to add that, and things of that nature. And now if I look in the references, you can see that I have system.net.http, system.net.http.extensions, system.net.http.primitives. These are all added to my package using NuGet via the Package Manager console. Okay, very cool. Just two ways to do the exact same thing. All right, so we want to now add our HTTP client. And so we don't see that. We're going to have to add a using statement to system.net.http. Great. HTTP client equals new HTTP client. Awesome. And now what I want to do is I'm going to go back to this Flickr URL that it gave me here. And I'm just going to copy this whole thing out and use this as a template. So Control C to copy it, and then I'm just going to paste it in right here. Control V to paste it in. And what I'm going to do is construct a URL, so string URL equals, and I'm going to paste that in there. And I'm going to substitute in those things that I know I want to change about this. And I'm going to put this on multiple lines. So I'm going to use a bunch of plus characters pretty much anytime there is some separator, like the query string separator or the ampersand, just to keep things clean. So we'll separate it there. Separate it there, and keep in mind this is just one long string. I'm just moving it to separate lines using the plus operator for string concatenation. Okay. And we'll do that. And then ultimately I'm going to take this big string and I'm going to replace out the parts of it. So I'm going to go var base URL equals string.format, and then I'll pass in the URL, and then I'll pass in all of the replacement stuff. All right, so we'll get back to this in a minute. So for example, let's take I want to add something that we didn't add the first time here, or that wasn't in here. We're going to add something called a license, because I only want to search for certain types of files that match certain licenses. But now I'm just going to replace a bunch of this information, and we'll come back and do text later. We'll add some of these things back in. I'm going to take them out for now. So we're going to replace, for example, latitude and longitude. And I'm going to hard code radius to 2 kilometers. Format is JSON, no JSON callback. And I don't think I need this API signature thingy, so we're going to get rid of that. All right, so that looks good. And so now we'll substitute in things like a license. So I'm going to need to create that at some point. And I'm going to need to create a Flickr API key. And then we're going to substitute in, we have this part, GPS chord center dot latitude, and then GPS chord center dot longitude. and we'll build this over time. All right, so licenses. Let's go ahead and attack that. And let me open up another page here real quick. And so here we can learn about the different licenses that are available. There are all rights reserved all the way to U.S. government work, no known copyright, and things of that nature. And so I want to target a certain number of licenses, and I don't want photos that'll pop up that are not in those licenses because I don't want to be restricted by those licenses. All right. And so what we'll do here is I'm just going to actually copy this for your reference. And I'm going to put that as a comment here, like right here, licenses. Paste that in. And then I'm going to actually paste in from 4 to 7. Do a multi-line comment. Great. So I'm going to build a string of licenses, and I'm going to replace the that with each of the comma that will separate the numbers, the licenses, the IDs, with a URL encoded value. So I'll just do something like this: string license equals we'll go 4, 5, 6, 7, and then license.replace. I'll get rid of all the commas, and I'll URL encode this by using the special code that represents a comma in a URL to C, like so. Okay, it's easy as that. The next thing I need is my API key, and you'll want to replace this with yours, and I can't emphasize that enough because it will not operate if you use mine, because I'm going to delete mine because it's not right for you to use my stuff. All right, get your own. All right. All right, here's the key. Copy that. Copy that. And we'll go string Flickr API key equals this. All right, and we've cleared up these references, so that should be good. Now we have the URL. Some of it is coming from the phone, and some of it we're kind of hard coding it in with constant values, and we can tack some more optional parameters onto the search a little bit later, but that should work for now. Now what we want to do is do string Flickr result equals. I'm going to use the client, so that HTTP client dot get string async, and then I'm going to pass in the base URL, like so. Now I'm going to get this little red squiggly line underneath it, and it says that this is an async method. Therefore, we need to use the await keyword here. And if we didn't already have it in place, we would need to add the async keyword here as well. But since we already had it once, we don't need to add it a second time. Again, we're going to devote a whole lesson to async, await, task of T, things of that nature, in a whole lesson, like 2 lessons from now. So just hold on. Just copy the code exactly the way you see it here for now, okay? And then finally what we want to do is, remember we added that result text block. I'm going to set its text attribute to this Flickr result. And so what all this is going to really accomplish is it's going to show me a little snippet of the JSON that we get back from a call to the web service. So now I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that everything works the way I have in my mind the very first time I try it. All right, originally you see the latitude, longitude, and it should be replaced, yes, with JSON data. Awesome. So now let's do this. I'm going to set a breakpoint because I need this Flickr result string. I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with it here in a minute. Okay, great. I'm going to hover my mouse cursor over. I'm going to go to the little mirror here, and I want to see it in a visualizer. And so I'm going to hit Control A on my keyboard to select all of the JSON and the little text visualizer, and hit Control C to copy it out to my clipboard. In fact, just for fun, I'm going to go ahead and paste the whole thing. You can see we get a lot of text back. All right. And I don't really care what this means at the moment. I will care about this very soon, possibly even before the end of this lesson. All right. But here's what I'm going to do with it. There's this nifty little tool that Clint found that will take JSON and will convert it to classes in C# that represent the structure of the JSON that you hold on your clipboard. So I'm going to put my mouse cursor there, and I'm going to hit Control V to paste all that JSON in, and I'm going to click Generate. And what it pops out is a bunch of classes, 3 classes. In fact, let's go ahead and copy these classes. So I hit the copy button. I'm going to hit Control C on my keyboard to copy this now. Get out of there. Close that. Close that. Stop that. I'm going to go to the very bottom here, and I'm going to stay inside the namespace, but outside of our main page class, and I'm going to hit Control V on my keyboard to paste in those 3 classes. So here we have it. At the very root, you have a root object, and this will represent the call you made to Flickr's API. In fact, I think what we want to do is change this to something a little more descriptive. We're going to call this Flickr data. All right. And Flickr data has a instance of photos, and photos represents the collection of photos that were returned from our search. So it does have a list of type photo, among other information like the number of pages that, if you have multiple pages of values that are returned back from a search, you can specify a certain page of it and all that kind of business. We won't need that functionality per se. We're only trying to get at this list of photo, and the photo is defined here. And you can see by the public properties that every photo has an ID, it has an owner, it has this property called secret, which I think is probably a random set of numbers and letters that make it impossible for a hacker to just go through and guess the URL of every photo on the site and waste bandwidth and steal information from Flickr in mass. And so they have a little secret code there. And then every photo sits on a server inside of a farm. Every photo has a title, and it will tell us whether it's public, and I don't know what these other values mean, but we could look them up if we went to Flickr's API page. Is a friend, is family, I don't know what that means. All right. So at any rate, but there's enough information here returned back that we can construct a URL that would allow us to give it to the image control and say, here is a URL for an image. Try loading that into your image control. And that's what we're going to try and do here. Now, when we're working with JSON, remember what we needed to do to work with JSON from the previous project? We use Newtonsoft JSON library. So how do we add that from the package manager console? We type in install package newtonsoft.json. Now think about this. If I can remember a handful of packages and their names, or I write a little cheat sheet on a stick-it note, on a post-it for myself, then I can add functionality to any app that I'm working on really fast without having to go through the package manager dialog and all that business. So this can be a very quick way to add features to your app. And while I was talking, we've already added that to our app now. So back here in our update map method where we've been working, we have the result. We don't need this line of code anymore. What we need to do is parse through that JSON. So Flickr data equals JSON JSON convert, and let's add that namespace as a using statement. Great. And we want to use deserialize object, passing in the type we want to deserialize into. So we're going to deserialize into the topmost object in that data structure that we got from JSON to, or C# to JSON, or it was JSON to C#, right? Here that we got a moment ago, right? From here. And then we're going to pass in the data, so Flickr result. And now we should have a populated set of classes that represent this object graph of photos. And so what we want to do is we're going to check this data. The data has this stat property on it. So Flickr data has a stat property, and if that property is okay, that means we successfully got data back. Cool. And so what we want to do is a for each through all that data. And we want to look at each photo. Actually, let me call this API data, and API data here, so I can keep the two different types of data straight in my mind. Much better. In API data dot photos dot photo. And what I want to do from this is I'm going to construct a URL, so to retrieve one photo, use this format. Here we go, http://. I'm going to give it a farm with a farm ID dot static flickr.com / we'll give it a server ID. We have all this data. Then we're going to give it the ID of the photo, the little secret password for that photo, and then a size. And the sizes are represented with _n_b for the different file sizes. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. .jpeg. Cool. So let me actually borrow this now. We're going to go string photo URL equals, and we'll give it all that, but we're going to replace all these little thingies here with replacement numbers. Server ID 1, ID is 2, the secret will be the 3, and then the size. For our purposes, we're only going to grab out the _n size for now. And then we'll do the replacement, so string.format, photo URL, and then we'll give it data dot, farm, data dot server, data dot ID. Now I'm going to have to give Clint the credit for figuring out most of this as usual. I've said that before. But he found somewhere, this is how you grab one image. And then it was just a matter of replacing in the little bits of image, the little bits of the URL that we have in our possession. And so that's how he went through it. He just spent time, looked at the documentation, read through it, and figured it out. And we're benefiting from it and kind of moving in fast forward as a result. But just keep in mind, you're just going to have to spend some time on the API documentation, no matter which web API you want to utilize, to learn how they require you interact with them in order to get data out. All right, so remember, the Flickr image control is just an image control in XAML for now, and eventually what we'll want to do is replace this Flickr image with a list of images. So the Flickr image.source, we'll set the source equal to the we can't just give it the URL. What is the data type on this? It is of type image.source. I think what we can do is give it a bitmap image object. So let's create a new bitmap image, and that is in a whole different place. We're going to have to add a using statement to system.windows.media.imaging, right? And to create a new bitmap image, we need to give it a URI. We know how to create URIs. Man, we've created so many URIs in this series. So we create a new URI, and we'll just give it the base Flickr URL. I think that'll do it. Now, I only want one, so I'm just trying to grab one photo. So I want to break out of this for each loop. So break. And now for the moment of truth. Let's go ahead and save this and then run it. And cross our fingers. Okay, so far so good. Yes! Looks like we got an image looking up the North Shore of Chicago's Lake Michigan coast. We got it. So proof of concept, we can get this to work. We got it to work with one. We got a lot of code in place, but we can leverage going forward, and now we're just needing to make improvements. So to quickly recap, there are quite a few important takeaways from this lesson. We learned about the Flickr API, which contains hundreds of method calls, giving us access to practically every feature of Flickr so we can integrate it into our apps. We learned about getting an API key and how to call the search API and how to integrate it into our app. We learned a little bit more about JSON, how to use the JSON to C#.com website to create class definitions in C# that match the JSON data that we want to work with. We learned about Newtonsoft.json's ability to deserialize the JSON into instances of those classes so that we can work with them in C#. And we have a pretty cool proof of concept complete. And now we're going to turn around and start to massage this into what we originally had envisioned in our low-tech mockup, and we'll start that in the next lesson. We'll see you there. Thank you. Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with LearnVisualStudio.net. We now have a map and a single image returned from Flickr, so we have the basic building blocks of our app in place. But our eventual aim is to show a list of images on a separate page, a results page, instead of just one. So in this lesson, we're going to do that. We're going to add a search results page and display all the images that are returned by our search. So our game plan in this lesson, we're going to first of all add around me assets for the tile image and so on to start branding our app. Nice little way to dip our toe back into the next lesson after a long, hard lesson previously. Then we're going to add an application bar and a search button on that application bar that will help us to navigate from our main page to the search results page that we'll add. Then we're going to add a new search results page. .xaml, we're going to add a text block to the page just to make sure that we can navigate from the main page, pass along the latitude and longitude, and then retrieve them out and display them in a little text block on the search results page. That's a nice little way to step into and make sure that our navigation works correctly. And then we're going to clean up and refactor the code that we've written in class files and clean up the code that calls our new class file method so that it more closely resembles our original diagrams, our low-tech mock-up of the user interface. And then by the time we're finished with this lesson, we should have a new search results page that lists, at least 20, 30, 40 results on the page. So that's what we're going to try and do. Another long lesson. Sorry, a lot of code. We're going to be moving things around. If you get lost, make sure you always refer to the text beneath this video. It may not line up perfectly, but there will be enough instruction there to help you get oriented the right direction and make sure you're kind of following along as much as you can. All right, so let's go ahead and move forward. The first thing we want to do, we're going to stop the previous execution. And I want to take the assets that I made available and that I've unzipped into the C9 Phone 8 project. You remember this folder. It had all the assets for the various projects we were working on. We want to grab the contents of the around me underscore assets. I'm going to right click and copy. And then I'm going to go to Visual Studio, to the assets folder. I'll just select all these and select delete permanently. And then right click and select paste. And now we should have a new icon, the feature.search.png. We have a new app icon. So it's looks like the Sears Tower, and it has a little camera next to it, which is translucent. It will show through any the primary color chosen on the phone. In my case, it would be yellow. In the case of our app, I think red is the default. Let's see what we have inside here as well. We've got a flip cycle tile as well. So we've got some assets. Now let's open up our WM app manifest.xml file, and we want to change the display name. I think it's just fine the way that it is. We want to make sure that the app icon is seen correctly, and we want to make sure that template cycle is chosen as the tile template. All right, it's important because much later on in this series, what we're going to do is whenever the user selects multiple images that they want as their lock screen, we also want to make those images available as images that we will cycle through. So if somebody pins our app to the start page, they'll see all of the selected images in a cycle. And so we start off with cycle 1 just being our application icon.png, and we'll add in the other cycle images programmatically once the user has chosen them from the results page. All right, so make sure template cycle, make sure the tile images are set for small. This should be the flip cycle tile small.png, and then cycle 1 can be the application icon.png. All right, so if you have all that, you make those changes, click save all, and then let's move on. The next thing we want to do is add the build localized application bar. So we want to add an app bar to our app. We've done this a number of times. I uncomment out both the call to this method and the method itself. I'm going to go to Edit, Advanced, Uncomment Selection. All right. And the next thing I'm going to need to do is make some modifications here. For example, we're going to change this URI to point to our assets folder. We have that new feature.search.png. So let's add that. Right. We're going to change the app bar button.text, and we'll just hard code that to the word search, and then app bar button.click. I want to wire that up to something called search click. So we'll add a new event handler method stub called search click. I'll right click it, select generate method stub. Great. And so when somebody clicks that little search icon on the toolbar, we want to navigate to a new page. I'm going to go ahead and set it up, and then we'll add a new page a little bit later here. So string nav2 equals string.format, and we'll give it a string, and then we'll give it a page, so we'll call that new page that we'll create in a moment, search results.xaml, and then we're going to pass the latitude and the longitude using a query string, so question mark latitude equals, and then we'll replace that, ampersand longitude equals, and then I'll add a replacement code for that. And so where can we get the latitude and longitude from? Yes, the around me map. Control.center.latitude. And then the around me map.center.longitude. Great. It's coming together. And then finally, how do we navigate from one page to another? Right, the navigation service. Navigation service.navigate. And navigate needs a URI. We've created URIs before. URI needs two parts. It needs a string representing a place we want to navigate to, and then URI kind, relative or absolute. Good, good, good. All right, very good. Now let's just see it in action, just for fun. All right, so we have our search button. Very cool. And if you take a look, hey, we got our Around Me logo and the red comes shining through. Very, very cool. All right, let's stop that. The next thing we need to do is add a new page to our project. So I'm going to right click and select Add New Item. We want to make sure you're in the Visual C# templates, a Windows Phone portrait page, and we're going to call this search results.xaml. And just to make sure that we are navigating and passing data, I'm going to add a text block that I will remove later. But this is just a little mini test for me to gain a little confidence that I'm doing it right. So I add a little text block, and then let's see, in the search results.xaml.cs, I want to add an event handler. So we're going to go loaded. We're going to go loaded plus equals and search results loaded. That's fine. And then here I'm going to set location text block dot text equals string dot format, and I just want to do something like this just to make sure we got it right. And one, and now we got a little dilemma. How are we going to get the values out of the navigation service? All right, so we're going to have to come back to that. I think what I'm going to do is create two private member variables, obviously called latitude and longitude. So that's the way I want to do it. But how am I going to get those values populated? Let me start by declaring them here. Private double latitude, and then private double longitude. All right, now how am I going to populate those? Well, I just happen to know that what we need to do is work with the onNavigated2 event for the phone application page. Now, unfortunately, it hasn't created it for us as a little template. But once the page has been navigated to, that means the navigation service has been engaged and we can grab out any query string parameters. Then that onNavigated to will happen before the page has completed loading. So that's the perfect time to grab out the query string values, latitude, longitude, set them to our private memory variables, and then we can rely on this actually having the right values. So here's the only tricky part. I'm going to have to look at either some templated code or perhaps look at another a code example to create the method stub for the onNavigated2 event. So I happen to know it's protected override void onNavigated2. And after I get so far, you can see that I can just hit tab on my keyboard and it will create the remainder of that event handler, plus it will call the base implementation on the phone application page, which is exactly what I want. And then after we've called the base onNavigated2, we can write our own code here and expect it all to work just fine. So latitude equals, and I know we're going to grab the navigation context dot, it has a query string, and I can then index into the query string using square brackets and then give it the value I want. So I know that's latitude, right? So that should return back the latitude. But wait a second, latitude is double, but I'm trying to grab out the query string, which is string, so I'm going to have to convert this. Fortunately, I'm going to use the convert system.convert class to convert to double, and I give it a string, and then everybody should be happy. Yes, okay, everybody's happy. Like, everybody better be happy. Convert to double. Let's just start there, and then we'll go navigation context, query string, and we need longitude. Awesome. All right, I think we got this working now. So let's go ahead and run it. All right, and if I hit the search button, it does navigate to this new page, and it passes along latitude and longitude, so we're good to go. All right, so now what I want to do is I'm going to refactor my code. The term refactor I'm using here very loosely in this context. It means I'm going to reorganize my code without changing the functionality. So I want to improve the quality of the code. I want to make sure it's more readable, that its structure is more correct, that it's organized better, but I don't want to change its functionality just yet. So, I have some problems with my code base that I'm not really happy about. For example, the most obvious one is that these classes, they need to sit in their own files, ideally. Now, I'm just going to create one file, and I'm going to stick them all in there. But if this were a real project, I would probably not do it that way. I'm going to call this the photo class. And the reason why I would prefer to put all of these into their own files instead of just one biggie is so that I can find them easily. I can find the classes easily using Solution Explorer instead of having to hunt and peck around for them. All right. So there we go. We've moved those guys into their own file. That's great. And so now this file only contains the definition for the main page.xaml.cs. Perfect. Okay, so that's the first improvement I want to make. And the next thing I want to do is I'm going to add another class, and I want to use that class to wrap the call to the Flickr API web service. So I'm going to call this this new class Flickr image. And it's going to have really two purposes, and I'll get to that in just a minute. All right, and the first purpose of this class, let me just make this a public class, is that it's going to represent one Flickr image. Now, we already talked about the URLs, that there are different sizes for images. Like we were pulling back a _n size, which I believe is the smaller of the two, and then there's a larger size. I'm not exactly sure. I'll figure it out here in a second. But I want one instance of this class to represent one image, but it could be at different sizes. So I'm going to create two URIs, one for the smaller version of the image, the 320 by something or other image. And so here, I'll just do it like this. Prop, tab, URI, tab, image, 320 for the smaller version, and then URI, image, 1024 for the large version. The smaller version will be used in the search results page to grab out smaller versions of the images. The 1024 will be for larger images that we'll use for the lock screen once you've made your selections. Okay, so Flickr image represents an image, but it could be different sizes of those images, or the URIs that point to different sizes of those images. But then I want to use this class for a second purpose as well, and that is to wrap the call we'll make and make it static. So we'll go like a public static get Flickr images, and it'll actually let me return the data type. We'll return a list of Flickr image, like so. So this class, when we call it, we'll call Flickr image.get Flickr images. We'll give it some information, and then it'll return back to us a list of images, and then we'll bind to that list of images and use the image 320 URI to show tiles with an image in each tile representing each of the images that were brought back from Flickr. All right, hopefully that makes sense. All right, so now this get Flickr images is basically going to be everything that we've done in here, like everything we've done from here down to like there, I think. All right. All right, so we're going to copy all that, and we're going to put it here like so. All right, and I'm going to need to resolve some of these guys because the new file does not have a using statement for several of the classes we're going to rely on. Let me just make a quick pass through here. All right, and since we're moving this to a new file, we're not going to have these values to pass in. So let me go ahead and we're going to add, like for example, double latitude and double longitude. And so then we'll replace these guys with latitude and longitude. And that should make them happy. And we have an await keyword, and we know how to resolve that. So we're going to have to make this public async static list of, now you're not happy. That's because when we make a method async, the return has to be a task of the type we want to return. And again, this will all get explained in the very next lesson, but to resolve it for now, I just wrapped the return value with task in an open and close angle bracket. Okay, we're going to need to resolve this as well using Newton JSONsoft. Great. And we no longer have Flickr image, so we don't really need that. We don't need that anymore, so I'm just going to delete those guys from there. We do need that, however. All right, let's get rid of that. Now our aim here is to return a list of Flickr images. So let me go ahead and create a list of Flickr images called images equals new Flickr images, like so. And then what we want to do is create a new Flickr image called image equals new Flickr image. Each time we do a loop, and our goal this time is to create this base URL. And so image.image320 equals the new URI, and give it the base Flickr URL plus this underscore n dot JPEG. So let's remove that from there. Okay. And then this line of code is going to be almost identical, except it's going to be for the 1024 version. And this will be the larger, the bigger version, underscore B. Then we want to add all those, or that image that we just built, to our images collection. And then finally here, we want to return images. All right, so that's ultimately what we're trying to do with this. Now we spent a lot of time constructing this URL. I mean, a lot of code is devoted to this purpose. And I think what I would prefer to do is to take all this out, and I'm going to come back to this, and I'm going to create another method, and I'll call this private string get base URL. And I'll just construct it in there. So then we can just do something like this. Var base URL equals get base URL. Like so. All right, why aren't you happy? Oh, if we're going to call a private helper method from a static method, we have to make it static as well. That's easy enough to do. Okay, so I think the only thing that I'm going to have to pass in latitude and longitude again. So double latitude, double longitude. Cool, that should satisfy that. But I think I want to pass in this Flickr API as well. I don't want to just hard code it in there. I might want to use this some other day. So it seems like a pretty useful little class to have around. So let's go ahead and let's go string Flickr API as well. And that should make you happy, or API key. Okay, do that. Good. And then we got to return something here. So let's return base URL. Okay, I think that'll work. Oh, but I need to pass in some stuff. So I'm going to have to pass in the Flickr API key. I'm going to have to pass in latitude. I'm going to have to pass in longitude. Which means I'm going to have to pass in string Flickr API key, like so. And just for readability's sake, I'm going to move these on different lines. And I'm also going to give it a default value of not a number, so that if you don't supply it, we might still be able to do a search, but we'll supply not a number, and we'll see what that gives us. We'll do the same thing here. Okay, a lot of typing of code here, but I think I have something that should work. And now what we'll want to do is we're going to revisit our search results .xaml, and we're going to want to call that Flickr image, or that get Flickr images method from here. Before I do that, let me hold on to this real quick. I'm just going to put this, sometimes in Notepad, I'll just hold on to values I know I'm going to need in the future, like so. And I think I can get rid of almost everything inside of here now. And the only thing I really want to hold on to, I don't even want this anymore. I think that's all I need. We'll get rid of that too, clean it all up. In fact, I'm going to go to the main page.xaml, and I'm going to remove this. And I'm going to remove that. I don't even need any of that stuff anymore. All right, we'll rework the row definitions stuff later. I'm not going to worry about that right now. But I think we've completely cleaned up the update map. And now what I need to do is I need to go into the search results.xaml.cs. And here what I want to do is I'm actually going to use this Flickr API key, and I'm going to make a constant out of it. So private const string pull that back, Flickr API key, great. And then this is no longer useful. Whenever we load the page, we want to kick off the Flickr image dot get Flickr images, and I'm going to pass in the Flickr API key. I'm going to pass in latitude. I'm going to pass in longitude. And then that should give me what I need there. What's your problem? Oh, I spelled string wrong. Easily fixed. Okay, so I got that back. That's good. And now I need to, what I want to do is I'm going to make images. Now, images is a list of Flickr image. I'm going to make that as the data context. So I'm going to set the data context property of the search results page. So any data that this page needs, I'm going to set that to images, like so. That should work. And then the next thing I need to do is go into the search results.xaml page. Let's make some room here. Set this to fit selection. Great. And here I want to change the definition of this page. We've already used a long list selector previously. I think that's what I want to use. I like the tiles that we worked with previously. Everything about that is good, so let's reuse that. So the content panel, and get rid of this text block. It's no longer useful. Let's go phone, long list selector. We'll set its layout mode equal to grid. This should all be familiar. Layout grid cell size equal to, got to give it two sizes, so 105, 105. And then I'm going to set the item source equal to the data context for this page. And since it's already set as data context for the page, I don't have to give it anything else. I can just give it this keyword binding, and it will find what it needs. Okay, but what I do need to do is phone long list selector dot item template. Whoops, not item source. Item template. There we go. I need to give it a data template. So how are we going to render each of these images, each of these Flickr image objects that come back? Let's go data template. And then let's set the image, setting the source equal to, we want to set the binding equal to a property like image 320. So the 320 property. And then, again, that stretch, I'm going to just say, hey, fill her up. Do the best you can. Don't stretch it, whatever you do. Okay. And while I'm here, I'm also going to go ahead and, while I'm thinking about it, before I forget, I'm going to change this to around me, and then I'll give some instructions, and we'll act on these instructions later. Pick for background. All right. All right, so if I did everything right, and that's a big if, I'm going to go ahead and run the app, and it should work. I mean, not just work a little bit, it should really work. Okay, I'm going to click the search button. Crossing my fingers. Crossing my fingers. Nothing's happening. I have a feeling we missed something somewhere. Let me, I got a suspicion though. We made it to the other page, but for whatever reason, we never got values back. So I'm thinking this has something to do with the search results.xaml.cs page. When we call Flickr images, do we not get information back from that? And it takes me a little bit to figure this out, but eventually I see that Flickr result returns no values, and it did before, so something's not quite right here, and then I realize what the problem is. I passed in latitude twice. Now, you probably caught that while I was typing, so why didn't you tell me? That's your fault. You're the wingman here. So latitude, longitude. Okay, let's go ahead and get rid of that. Whew, okay, let's go ahead and run it now. Boy, I hate when things like that happen. But I think everybody does. So let's go ahead and click search this time, and with any luck, yes! Yes! All right, we see results are in or around the John Hancock Center. Awesome. Okay, so before we close this lesson out, during a code review, Clint discovered two small bugs in our app, and it's really important that we take the time to fix these. Now, so I'm going to need to make just a few small modifications to what we've already done. So I'm coming back to this a couple of weeks after I originally recorded, so that's why I have the hockey beard now. But these modifications that I'm about to make to the code, you're not going to see these modifications, the lines of code that I'm about to add, in the rest of the videos. However, they will be present in the downloadable source code, also in the text and screenshot version of these lessons, and so on. So both of these bugs appear in this get base URL helper method that we created earlier in this lesson. So the first mistake that I made was really just a dumb mistake on my part. This replace method returns a string. It doesn't just set the string that it's called on, rather it will return a string value. So we need to capture the value that's returned from replace and set the license variable to that new value. So it's as simple as this. License equals license.replace, and that will fix that bug. All right, now the second bug that we have in our code will only surface if you attempt to use this app with your physical phone device, or perhaps if you choose a different location than I've selected in the emulator. So actually, it's not really a problem with our app per se, it's actually a problem with Flickr's API. So Flickr's API will only accept 5 digits of precision, and if you ever send it more than 5 digits of precision after the decimal point, then it will never return a result. So sometimes the phone will return 8, 10 places of precision, and therefore we're going to have to use the math.round method to ensure that we only send up to 5 digits, or rather 5 places of precision. All right, so here we go. Let's go ahead and make the changes. I'm going to just do it right below this line of code that we just modified. So if not, double dot is not a number, so we'll just make sure that we're working with a good number here for the latitude. Then we'll set latitude equal math.round, and we'll give it latitude. And then you can also specify the rounds a decimal value to the specified number of fractional digits. That's the overload that we want. So we'll just set that to 5. And then we'll do the same thing for the longitude as well. So if not, double is not a number, longitude, then we're going to set longitude equal to math.round, longitude, and we'll pass in 5. All right, and that should fix the problem. Okay, sorry about that. Sorry for the confusion. So let's go ahead and recap this lesson. To quickly recap, the big takeaway in this lesson was navigating to a new page, and also talking about how we were able to restructure and refactor the code so that its implementation becomes cleaner and more obvious. And you'll see the value of this reorganization a little bit later as we continue on through this series. I'm really just planning ahead by separating out a lot of this code into this class, flickrimages.cs. And while I don't think that we really learned anything new per se with regards to binding and such, we did get another chance to exercise the things that we learned whenever we were working with the soundboard application yet once again. Okay, so like I promised, it's time to talk about the async and await keywords, and we're going to do that in the very next lesson, so we'll see you there. Thank you. In this lesson, I want to talk about the keywords we've added to our source code in several spots. The keywords I'm referring to are the async keyword, the await keyword, and the task of T keyword. And you see all three of these in the get Flickr images method in our Flickr image class. So these keywords are newly added to C# 5.0, and they're generally referred to as the new async feature, which is short for asynchronous or asynchronicity or asynchrony. Okay, I've heard all three used. In a nutshell, this feature is a simplified way of improving the performance of the app and making it more responsive to the end user without the complexity of writing a multi-threaded application. If you call a method in the Windows Phone API or some other library that supports async that could potentially take a long time, the method will say, essentially, I promise to get those results to you, or I promise to do that work as soon as possible, so you go on and do your business, and I'll let you know when I'm done. So then the app can continue executing and even exit out of method contexts, and at the point when it actually needs the results, then it can stop there. But other work can be going on, and it doesn't have to be waiting on other code that might take a long time to execute. Okay? So another word for this in computer programming terminology is a promise. Under the hood, whenever you compile this source code, the compiler picks apart the source code and it implements a complex series of statements in the intermediate language to allow asynchronicity to happen flawlessly, and it does it usually without the use of multiple threads. Okay, so when is async? When is it best used? It's for operations that have a high degree of latency but are not compute intensive. All right. So, for example, we want to retrieve data from a web API like we're doing with the right here, this getString async method. Now, before async, we'd make a call out to the web server, and that could take a long time. I mean, your phone has to connect to the internet, it has to make the call, the server on the other side has to determine the results and pass it all that information back. So that could take a second, maybe 2 seconds, maybe a worst case scenario, you got a bad connection on your phone or whatever the case might be, it could take 3 seconds, which even a second is an eternity in computing. But the phone's processor is just sitting around, it's not busy, it's just waiting for an answer, right? So this is known as I/O bound. I/O means in, out. So things like information in or out from to and fro the file system, the network, the camera, and so forth. They involve I/O bound operations, and they're good candidates for async. In fact, the Windows Phone API designers decided to bake in async to all I/O bound operations, forcing you and I, the developers, to keep the phone responsive to the end user by forcing us to use async functions like getString async. Here we have, and when we called out on HTTP, right, using the HTTP client class. Contrast that to compute-intensive operations such as a photo filter app that takes a large image from the camera and then it runs complex mathematical algorithms on the phone's CPU to change the colors or the position of each pixel in the image. It might be millions of pixels that it has to process, and that could take a long time too, but in that case, the phone's processor is hard at work. It's not sitting around waiting. It's actually breaking a sweat trying to process all of that data. That type of operation is known as CPU bound, and that's not a good use of async. In that case, you'd want to consider a background worker which helps you manage the threads on the Windows Phone platform. Now, if you're developing in .NET, you might prefer working with threading via the Task Parallel library, or the TPL library instead, or you could even revert back to managing threads manually, which has been an option from the very earliest versions of .NET. But that's not an option on the Windows Phone. So understanding multi-threading, parallel programming, the Task Parallel library, and even background workers on the phone are way beyond the scope of this series and especially this lesson. It's a very large topic, and I'm not going to lie to you, it often makes my head spin when I try to study it. But if you want to learn a little bit more about async, specifically how it applies to the Windows runtime, if you're building on the Windows RT API, and you just want to understand async in general, this is a great article to start with. It's a video that I recorded. It's called Working with Async Methods in the Windows Runtime. So check that out. And you might also want to read in the comments below that video where I further explain this idea. That should be sufficient for now. But back to the topic at hand. Async is for those common occasions where you have a blocking operation that's not compute intensive, such as is the case here where we're waiting for the HTTP client.getString async operation to complete. In this case, you use the await keyword, which says, I'll get back to you when I'm finished. So then the thread of execution can continue on to the other lines of code until they absolutely have to have the results of the operation. Now in our case, since the very next line of code we're attempting to use Flickr result and we haven't gotten Flickr result yet, we're going to pretty much be waiting on this line of code no matter what. So it maybe doesn't give us that, in our case, that really fast speed improvement because we can't do a lot of operations after we make the call out via HTTP. However, while we are going out and making that call, other things on the phone can be happening, so we're not locking up the user experience. So any method that uses an awaitable method like we have here, this getStrings async, it must be marked with the await keyword, and therefore we also have to mark the method itself that contains it with an async keyword. And if it's supposed to return a value, like in our case we're trying to return a list of Flickr image, then that return value has to be wrapped in a task of T, like we did here, where we wrapped our list of Flickr image with a task of T around it. Okay. Now, if the method happens to be void, then it merely has to be marked async void in the method signature. You don't have to worry about the task of T stuff. Okay. But that essentially means that any method that calls our method can continue executing until it absolutely needs this list of Flickr image. So, therefore, take a look at the search results.xaml.cs. If you take a look here, we are calling getFlickrImages. Since it returns a task of T, a task of list of Flickr image, then we have to await that call, and therefore we have to mark our search results loaded event handler method as async as well. However, since search results loaded is what you would call a topmost method because it's an event handler that gets fired off by during the execution of the app, the async calls end here. All right. So again, remind me why we're doing all this. Well, it's in hopes of making our app more responsive. This operation should not be blocking the phone's processor from taking on other tasks, or the phone itself from answering a phone call or running background tasks on behalf of other apps. It won't prevent the user from selecting any of the hardware buttons on the phone and getting an instant response. All right, so to recap, the big takeaway in this lesson is what async is and how it works and what scenarios it was designed to address, and its overall purpose, and that is to keep the phone and your apps as responsive as possible during long-running I/O-bound operations. Okay, so we'll pick up the development of our app in the very next lesson. We'll see you there. Thank you. Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with LearnVisualStudio.net. Currently, we can find all images on Flickr based on the locale of the device. However, in our original low-tech mockup design, we wanted to allow the user to filter the results by a keyword or search phrase. So that we're going to enable that in this lesson. So our game plan in this lesson is, first of all, we're going to modify the layout of the main page.xaml to include a topic or search text box that will allow a user to add or type in a specific search term to include in the search of images from Flickr. Then we're going to make that topic, take that topic rather, and send it to Flickr's web service. That'll require that we change some of the code in a couple of places to accommodate the passing and the receiving of the topic value. Then we're going to add the concept of radius to the app, which would allow us to specify the distance of the latitude and the longitude for Flickr to include in its search. I'm also going to change the code a little bit to harden it, or rather to make it impervious to accidental or malicious values that are nonsensical. So we're going to, in other words, practice defensive programming, and I'll talk about that a little bit. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to do is clean up the main page.xaml because we want to add our search box, and the first thing we're going to do is change up the definitions here. I'm going to get rid of this topmost row. I'm going to change this row definition, not give it a height, which will basically just say, which is essentially the same thing as giving it a height equal asterisk, okay? And then I'm going to change this to auto, all right? And then I'm going to add a text block right, so now I only have 2 rows. And in the top row, I'm going to put the map. So that should take up the majority of the space. And then below the map, what I'm going to do is add a stack panel. And I'm going to put it into grid.row equals 1, so that'll put in the second row. And then I'm going to add a text block and set its text equal to topic. And I'll tell you what we're going to do there as well. I'm going to go foreground equal to, and we'll just set this to a static resource, phone subtle brush. Okay. And then I'm going to add a text box that'll allow the user to type in the search topic. And if we were to stop right there, and you can see here, let's zoom in a little bit more. Zoom in at like 67. Go down the bottom here. And you can see that, if I can get a selection outside of this, it really what I would like there's a built-in padding or margin, and I would like to push that text box all the way out to the left-hand side so that it lines up with the T in topic. And then to make it symmetrical, I'd like to accomplish the same thing over here as well. And I happen to know that's a 12 pixel margin. So to negate a 12 pixel margin, I'm going to give it a new margin. And I'm going to set it to -12 on the left. That should push it out. And 0 on the top, -12 on the right, and 0 on the bottom. And when I do that, let's get our mouse cursor out here. Okay, now we're lined up nicely with the T and topic there, and the same will be true over here. Now here's just a little trick. You don't have to specify -12, 0, -12, 0. If you were to leave off the last 2 values, then it will be -12, 0, -12, 0 automatically. Or if you were to just set the margin equals -12, it'll be a -12 on all 4 sides. So just a little small tip there. All right, great. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to take the value, whatever's been typed into search topic, and I want to pass that to our search results page. So in the main page.xaml.cs, whenever the user clicks on the search click icon in the app bar, we want to pass along one additional value. Topic equals, and we'll send in a second replace value there. And so I'm going to need to get the topic from somebody, somehow, somewhere. And that means that I'm going to need to retrieve string topic equals our search topic dot text value. All right. And I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to wrap this search topic dot text in something called HTTP utility dot URL encode. And first of all, you can see that it also comes from system.net.http utility. I think we already have that using statement. System.net. It comes from the same place as this, I believe. Or actually, it's system.net. Okay, good. All right, and really what's important is what it does. It converts a text string into a URL encoded string. So I'm concerned that a user might enter characters into the search topic.text field that could be interpreted incorrectly, especially when they're passed over the internet. For example, using an ampersand or a question mark could harm the interpretation of the rest of the query string. So this URL encode method can be used to encode the query string values or even the entire URL. If characters such as blanks and punctuation are passed in an HTTP stream without encoding, they might be misinterpreted at the receiving end. So URL encoding converts characters that are not allowed in a URL into a character entity equivalent. So for more information about URL encoding, check out this post on MSDN. So when you're working with query strings, whether in HTML or XAML, it's always a good idea to URL encode, especially if you're going to then pass that query string to another website, and especially if that value was originally entered by an end user who could type in anything, including unpredictable values. All right, so that should clear up that potential problem. Now what we want to do in the search results.xaml.cs is accommodate that on Navigated 2. So let's create a private string underscore topic. And then in there, we will put underscore topic equals navigation context dot query string, and we'll retrieve out topic. Okay. And now what we want to do is I want to pass this into the get Flickr images, because that's ultimately what will make the call to Flickr. So before I actually do that, let's go back. Let's go to our Flickr image.cs file, and let's change this definition and add the notion of a topic. Okay, and then I know that I'm going to need to pass that into this get base URL. So let's go to definition, and I'm going to go string topic as well, right here. And then in string topic, let's add topic like right here. So add topic, or what is it? It's actually text, isn't it? I seem to recall when we were originally looking at, at text, a free text search. Photo whose title, description, or tags contain the text will be returned. Okay, so that's what we're looking for here. So not topic, text. And we'll pass that in as the fourth input parameter. And so here, here, we'll pass in topic. Great. Now let's make sure we're actually calling. Yeah, we're going to need to change this and pass in the topic here. Actually, underscore topic. All right, let's make sure it builds. That I haven't forgot to include it somewhere. Yeah, I forgot it somewhere. Yeah. There. Right? Yeah, that should work. Okay, good. So let's run it. All right, and so now let's, I'm going to hit page down to get rid of the keyboard. I'm going to type in observatory and click search. All right, so I get back different images. Now I have no real way to validate these results other than to perform a similar search on Flickr's own website and then look for similarities between the list I'm displaying in the Around Me app and the results from their website. But I'm satisfied with the results, so I'm not going to take the time to thoroughly check the results. I'll just trust that it's working for now. So we've satisfied the title of this lesson, of this video, by adding filtering on the results based on keywords. However, in the time that remains, what I want to do is add two small improvements to our get Flickr images method in the Flickr image.cs file. First one is that I'm going to stop hard coding the radius, and I'm actually going to pass that in to our Flickr image.get Flickr images method. And the intent here is so that the Around Me map, if you were to kind of zoom in or zoom out, we can take the amount of information, so the radius displayed on that map, and pass it in. So we can expand the radius or shrink the radius by using the zoom in or zoom out of the map itself. I'm not going to implement that in this series of videos, however. Clint implemented part of that in his example. But I don't want to take the time to do it because it's very code intensive. Instead, I'm going to let you take a look at Clint's original version of the Around Me app, and then you can decipher out how to do that on your own. It'd be a great exercise to learn. There's a lot of math. I don't know. I get confused when there's too much math, so I'm going to leave it to him to show you how to do that. But we're going to set it up because we've already done the hard work. We've already done this once with text, introducing another variable to the call. And then the second thing that I want to do is I'm going to add some defensive programming. So the phrase defensive programming is a thought process or an approach to writing code. In this case, I'm going to apply that thought process to mean that I want to do some checking of the query string values that we receive and ultimately pass to our getFlickerImages method, to check the values that were input for latitude and longitude that I'm passing from the main page to the results page, and I want to add double quotes around the topic that I want to pass to the Flickr API so the user can add a phrase. If you want to learn more about defensive programming from a high level, a great place to start is at Wikipedia at this URL. So let's begin adding the notion of radius to our app. I'm not going to take the time, like I said, to implement this fully. I'm going to make sure that Clint's original application that adjusts the radius that we sent to Flickr based on how zoomed in or zoomed out we are is available. So look for that somewhere here on this webpage where you're currently watching or originally downloaded this video. So at any rate, I'm going to modify the flickerimage.cs file. Specifically, I'm going to modify our getBaseURL method to include a radius input parameter. So here at the very bottom, we'll go double radius equal radius equals double dot not a number. Okay, and we'll get back to this not a number business here in a little bit. And then I want to also go down here, and I'm going to change out radius to add it there, and then finally I'm going to add it there. And it looks like I missed a comma there. Okay, that should make it work nicely. Now, I'm not satisfied with this just yet. I'm going to rework some of this in order to take advantage of these not a number defaults that I've added here. And the idea is this, and why I've even added these in the first place. If these values are not sent in, these are optional values, if they're not sent in to the call to the getBaseURL method, then I don't want to include them here in my string URL, and I don't want to add them into ultimately the base URL that gets returned by this method. Okay. Furthermore, with regards to topic, I want to add double quotes around it. There's some massaging of the data after I construct the basics of this URL. Okay. So let's change some things out about this. And fortunately, it doesn't matter what order we send these in. So I can remove things like latitude, longitude, the text, and the radius, like so, and this will still work. Of course, the base URL is going to not work quite as well because we need to get rid of now all of this stuff, pretty much all the variable bits, except for the Flickr API key. And then here, I'm going to do some gated checks. If not double dot is number latitude. So if the latitude value passed in is not a number, and we'll do the same thing for longitude. If the longitude is not a number, then I'll go ahead and add them, but if not, we won't add them in. Okay. So and lat equals 0 and longitude equals 1, and then we'll substitute in latitude and longitude. Okay, so we're making sure that these are real values. If they're not not a number, then we will not add them to our URL that we're actually going to return back and then call, right? So that's the thought process there. So we're doing that gated check. We'll do the same thing with radius. Double is not a number, radius. So if it's not passed in, we'll just leave it out. If it is in, we'll go ahead and add it. Okay. And the last thing I want to do is make it so that we can add a phrase with spaces in between. The URL encoding should have taken care of this, but just to be on the safe side, what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap the text with double quotes, and I'm going to go ahead and just URL encode the double quotes as a %22. That's a double quote in ASCII. So if not string dot is null or white space topic. So as long as there's something in that string topic, then base URL string dot format and text equals, and so here we go. %22 replacement code 0, %22 quotation mark for the ending of that literal string, and then we'll replace topic in there. All right, great. And everything else should work just fine. Now, since we have changed our getBaseURL method to include radius, let's make sure that we have it everywhere. Like, for example, we haven't added it here, so it's going to be not a number. We want it in there, but that will mean that we need to supply it. Of course, we're going to do that here. Like so. Very good. And then finally, what we're going to do is in our search results.xaml.cs page, we're going to add the notion of radius. So private double radius, like that. And then when we call Flickr images, send it in like that. And then we'll go ahead and retrieve it from a query string. So we'll pass it all the way from the front. So radius, and when I say pass it all the way from the front, I mean we're passing it in from our main page.xaml.cs. So we're going to change this to and radius equals. We'll add a fourth replacement. And here I'm just going to hard code the number 5. And at this point, you would want to take a look at what Clint has done, and with his version of the app that retrieves how zoomed in or zoomed out you are, and then based on the map and the zoom level and the pixels that are visible, then that would somehow relate to your radius in terms of kilometers. There's a whole calculation. I don't get it. He's a smarter guy than I am. I'm willing to admit that. But let's go ahead and run and make sure our app still kind of works, since we made a lot of changes to it. Okay. All right, and here we go. We want to get into, let's look observatory again. Click search. And we get back results like we did before. Maybe they're a little bit more narrow because we changed from or maybe they're more broad actually because we changed. However, I think observatory limits that. Okay, so the recap, the big takeaway from this lesson was how to grab values from XAML input controls. Didn't really talk about that a whole lot, but here in the main page.xaml.cs, we did something we haven't done before, and that was to retrieve the text value of the search topic text box control. Okay, and then we also talked about how to program defensively to make sure we check the input values to ensure that they're valid. We talked about how to URL encode whenever you pass values, especially end user generated input values into query strings of any type. That's what we did here. And along the way, we were able to expand the usability of our app by allowing the user to specify the type of images that he or she is looking for by adding the topic. And then also we talked about the radius, but again, you'll want to take a look at Clint's work for that. Okay, so that concludes this lesson. We'll continue on the next lesson. We'll see you there. Thanks. Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with LearnVisualStudio.net. When our app launches, it'll need to ascertain the current GPS position and then update the map control. And that could take a little bit of time. And we want to give the user some feedback, some visual feedback that all is fine, the application is still working. And so we're going to do that in this lesson. So here's the game plan. First of all, we're going to create a new progress indicator object and tell our system tray when it needs to display the progress indicator and when it needs to hide it. And then secondly, to accomplish that, I'm going to create a little helper method that'll show or hide our new progress indicator. So it's hard to visualize exactly what the system tray and the progress indicator look like in an app. So I use an example straight off of this web page on MSDN, and it helps me see what I'm working with here. Take a look at the little transparent purple system tray at the very top. You can see that I set the foreground color to yellow. So the system tray is that ever-present little bar at the very top. Sometimes it's hidden depending on what you're doing with your phone. But as you can see, the current time is part of the system tray. And if I were to click on the tray, you can see that the battery and the network strength is also part of the system tray as well. And so what you can do is create a progress indicator object and then give it to the system tray to use as the current progress indicator for our app. And then we can show and hide that progress indicator at will. So as you can see right now, I have a progress indicator going across the very top. It's those little red dots that keep appearing, they catch up with each other, and then they continue on. And so in our app, I'm going to use a progress bar to provide feedback initially when the app is determining its GPS position and then populating the map control. And so I'm going to write some logic that will hide and show the progress indicator as I need it. So our first job here, our first matter of business is just to close down this little example. Back in our Around Me app, I want to create a progress indicator when the main page has loaded. So in our main page loaded event, right before we update the map, what I want to do is I'm going to reference the system tray. And as you can see, I don't need to do anything special. It's already part of the Microsoft.phone.shell that we've added to, let's see if that's part of this. Yeah, it's part of our using statement for the namespace we already have loaded by default. So we're getting a reference to our system tray. And then we're going to call the progress indicator. We're going to set the progress indicator into a new instance of progress indicator. All right, so that is our app's progress indicator to work with. And now what we want to do is actually show and hide it. So to do that, I'm going to create a little helper method. I guess I'll put it right here. And it'll be private static void set progress indicator. And we'll pass in whether we want it visible or not. So is visible is Boolean. And then what we'll do is just call the system tray dot progress indicator dot is indeterminate, and is indeterminate means that it'll just keep going and going and going. It's not like a true progress indicator. We're at 30%, 40%, 50%, 100%, you're finished. So it is indeterminate. I'll go ahead and set that to whatever the value is. We usually probably could just leave that on to true all the time. It wouldn't hurt anything. And then the biggie is visible, and we'll set that as well. Okay, so now we can turn it on and off based on what we pass in. And now we just need to use this little helper method. So now that we have it, we're going to use it in our potentially long-running update map method. In fact, we're going to update the user on the progress by changing the text of the progress indicator throughout the various states of the update map method as well. So right here, we're going to set the progress indicator equal to true, so we're turning it on, and then also system tray dot progress indicator dot text equals getting GPS location, and then after we've gotten the location, I'm going to go system tray dot progress indicator dot text equals acquired, and then at the very end here I'll go set progress indicator false, so we'll turn it off. And so let's go ahead and run it. Now if your internet connection is fast, you might blink and miss the action here, but if the user has poor reception on their phone, it could be the only thing letting them know that the app is still functioning. Okay, there's getting GPS location, and yeah, we didn't really see the message of acquiring. However, we did see the first part, the getting GPS location part. Okay, in the interest of making our update map method a little more robust, what I'm going to do is actually wrap a try catch around, let's say right here. So I'm going to do try. I'm going to move all of this inside of the try. And then, let me go ahead and move some of this stuff in. And then, I want to catch two potential scenarios here. Catch unauthorized access exception. And so here I want to put message box.show location is disabled in phone settings. So basically this, if the user doesn't allow us to use the GPS on the phone, then we need to let them know that that's a problem, and so we want to show them a message that says as much. Or if there's any other problem, then we want to catch that as well, and we'll just do a message box.show ex.message. It's a little bit lazy on our part, but it'll be just fine. Let me go ahead and wrap that with a block. Okay, now I feel better about this. So as we're moving through our project, we're just looking for these opportunities to improve the code a little bit, and so that's a good spot for that. Okay, so just to recap, the big takeaway from this lesson is learning what the system tray is and how to pass it a progress bar that we can show and hide and change the text of to keep users informed about the progress of long-running operations in the app. All right, so we're going to continue on to the next lesson. We'll see you there. Thank you.